hosting this conference.
Yeah, then I can control you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make sure that I could pronounce the name of the second speaker. Because, see, any name that I don't understand, I speak it in Chinese, which basically I divided into syllables, which would have been butchered even worse than I probably will. Welcome. Back from your break. Enough caffeine and sugar?
Yep.
Good. But this, you guys, the speakers have to understand that in about an hour, that blood sugar level is going to drop considerably. So the perkiness of your presentations must continue throughout the discussion. And what we're going to do is, as usual, is going to have just one up here at a time so the others can enjoy the presentation. I'm going to be short because I want to devote more of our time to the actual substance. But I was actually, when they were initially saying I was going to chair, I got a little scared because I'm not a hard scientist. But then when I found out that they placed me on the innovation panel, I was really pleased. Because in the last couple months, the issue, because I do China, right? And there's been a lot of talk, particularly after a month ago when Tom Friedman, did you guys see his op-ed about a month ago where he was talking about China's green revolution and how their clean tech development was leaving the United States in the dust. They are the new, not just the factory. He was seen, pitching them as the innovators as well. And then, so the meetings I had subsequently that focused on clean tech, I had Duke Energy and other people speaking, and everyone said across the board, no, the Chinese, they make things, but they're not innovators like us. And I started thinking, I didn't ask them because I didn't want to seem stupid in front of them, but I was thinking to myself, well, what does it mean? What do we mean by innovation? And why can't the Chinese be innovators, right? And so I think some of my own kind of curiosity may be answered, I hope, today during the panel. We're going to start off with... Carolyn is going to start off. You're going to kick us off. Being a little bit, I think, more macro and focusing on kind of national policies that maybe promote scientific innovation. Oh, and he just told me. Guillermo Falladori will talk about a need for kind of a social approach to guarantee equity in nanotech development. And Susan Cozen, she's going to talk about an extensive study, and I mean like way extensive study, that looked at 8 different countries. It was a cross-national, cross-technology study on the distributional effects of emerging technologies. So again, the first 3 speakers are definitely talking a lot about the innovation, the equity issues. And the last speaker who I just found out about, clearly, I don't know the paper, Romanus Berg? Where's Romanus Berg?
He's right outside the room.
Okay, he's outside the room. I just want to make sure. Hi, Romanus Berg. Don't know the paper what the exact presentation is about because you were added. But what's good is that I do know that you're from Ashoka, which very much in its essence is one that focuses on social entrepreneurship and the stress for equity. And I really like that, getting some of these science folks mixed in with an NGO. Their bios, which is on the website, just going to summarize the trend of the bios, and I think even good old Romanus is about the same. These people focus on innovation and equality, and they tend to move around a lot. Geographically and even in the type of spheres where they're doing their research, which I think is going to be a testament to the kind of richness of their research that they do. They didn't just kind of hang out at the same university. I've offended the people who have hung around the same university. That's good too. Just trying to put a nice little, little bit of sheen on our 4 speakers here, and I'm officially stopping now, so you can start.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
And each speaker is going to stick to 15 minutes.
All righty.
15 to 20 minutes at most.
I'll do my best as long as you...
I will cut you off. You need to go last, okay? Initially, you were going to be last, and then...
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Caroline Wagner, and I hate being short because I'm kind of stuck back here behind the podium. So I might move a little bit this way so I can actually see people. I'm going to talk today about research that I have done over the last few years on network connections among scientists and how they become connected to one another and how those kinds of dynamics can actually help the development process. The work that...
Caroline, excuse me a second. I'm giving you 5 inches.
Thank you. That is so great. Ta-da! And the name of my presentation, as you can see, is The New Invisible College. I mentioned yesterday, and Todd Olson was very kind to put in a plug for my book. I brought it with me today, and I have copies outside for sale, $20 at the author's discount price. And I look forward to any comments on this approach to trying to understand the development process. The research for the book was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and Evan is here from the same office that funded the work. And the idea was indeed to find new ways to think about innovation and development. And innovation, Jennifer challenged us to define it, and I would suggest that innovation is adding value to products and processes that provide some kind of service to the end user. And that's a very broad definition, and I think you can see that it doesn't mean that you have to bring a brand new product to the marketplace in order to innovate. That sometimes bringing an existing product in a new way to add value can be useful. So what I want to talk about out of the book is what kinds of infrastructures are needed in order to bring this kind of dynamic of science, scientific knowledge to the development process. I think one of the things we all know intuitively is that science or any kind of knowledge doesn't honor political borders and boundaries. Even though research may be funded by the United States or Germany or Japan, that knowledge can move and can move relatively freely, especially now in the information era. And it uses technology to do that. That's one part of this invisible college that I'm talking about. Technology is used as both an infrastructure and as an end product to the process. The second part of an infrastructure that we need to focus on in terms of using this invisible college, the dynamics of knowledge exchange, is of course human resources, and we've talked a lot about that. Brain circulation, people moving as well as people staying in place and using their knowledge and capability to make things sink in locally. The third is institutions, of course. Institutions retain knowledge and they play a very important role in development. And then infrastructure, some of the very basics of infrastructure, including roads and things like that, are needed. And then one of the things that's often not really brought up a lot in discussions is the need for collaboration and coordination. The need to cross outside of institutions and across infrastructures to encourage collaboration, coordination among sectors, across disciplines, and so on. These are all needed for technology-based development. And finally, you have to have some kind of knowledge base that's being drawn on locally. Technology is simply a tool and the knowledge to use it. So you have to have the knowledge aspect of it, and I think that's something else that's come up in our discussions the last few days. You can have a technology, but it's only an artifact until you know how to use it and you have people with whom you can interact. So this work actually that I'm talking about today, technology, human resources, institutions, and infrastructure, collaboration, and knowledge, has been put into let's see, how do I move to the next slide? A framework that the World Bank uses now to... I just want to make sure that you know these words.
You have to hit down.
Okay, hit down. Have you got that now? There. Okay. So
it's a down.
Down. All right. So we
there are lots of arrows on this thing.
We've made an acronym out of it called THIC. That's technology, human resources, infrastructure, collaboration, and knowledge. And for each of those aspects, then, this is a methodology we're using and studies that I'm doing with the World Bank right now, in which we take this methodology and we apply it and go to visit different countries within different technical sectors and look at the extent to which they are thick with the capability to accept new knowledge and new understanding of technologies. And so I think some of the questions that we have brought up, if we're looking at technology, is it open source or protected? Human resources, are they trained locally or are they imported? Are they brain circulation? Infrastructure, do you have a standards organization or access to standards functions? Collaboration, do you have intermediary organizations? Like a lot of times business associations play that role as an intermediary in the innovation sectors. And finally, knowledge. Indigenous knowledge or imported knowledge. There's lots, as Scott just brought up, there's a lot of indigenous knowledge that's really very, very useful. You can have imported knowledge, you can bring it in from the global sector, but local knowledge is extremely important in terms of innovation at the local level. So if we're talking then about making countries thick with the absorptive capacity they need to accept technology and to use it, then what the question is, what is the dynamic of this technology development in a globalized world? One of the things that I would suggest is that this is not national, nor is it flat. Somebody brought up Thomas Friedman and he says the world is flat. Well, I suggest it's not flat at all. It's very highly structured, but it's not structured in, some people suggest at a national level. Some people talk about national innovation systems. To me, a national innovation systems model really doesn't work in a development context. These systems don't operate at the national level, nor should they in a lot of cases, because small countries simply cannot build the kinds of infrastructure that large countries have built over hundreds of years. So nations still mediate within this global system, within this invisible college. There's still a role for nations and for national policy, but it is not a national system, nor is it institution-based, even though institutions still retain knowledge. People tend to be free agents, tend to move around. As Jennifer said at the beginning, innovative people tend to move around and always looking for places and ways to add value. And so as people tend to, as we know, a lot of times people move to advanced countries in order to become educated. If you look at the long-term history over time, as their countries develop infrastructure and scientific capacity, they tend to move home. So if you look now at Mexico, you look at Brazil, Argentina, countries like that, and the mezzanine level of development, people now are more likely to go home when they're trained in science. And so institutions are very important, but they are not where the dynamics are within the system. The system of the globalized system is not constructed. There's no international ministry of science that's organizing science around the globe and saying, you do this and you do that, and I'll put these people together. Even though we still seek specific outcomes and we're looking for goods to come out of scientific investment, they are not constructed. Nor are they manageable. They can only be guided and they can be incentivized. You can lay incentives on the table to encourage people to organize in certain ways, but you cannot construct that and you can't manage it for certain outcomes. So then what is this system? What is this invisible college that I suggest is structuring the science and technology system right now? As I said, this system is highly structured. And I'd say there are 5 forces that are structuring this system. One is networks. We've talked a lot about networks. We're all involved intuitively in networks and understand them at some level. Especially, I have teenagers, and I see that teenagers know networking better than anyone on the globe, on the planet. We could learn a lot from them, they know how to get in contact with the next person who knows where the party is, and so on. And I think we all remember those days. The second aspect of this is emergence, and that is that these kinds of connections and collaborations in which knowledge is exchanged emerge from the combined interests of the participants. It's very difficult to put a biological scientist together with a material scientist in the room and have them come out with an added value or innovation unless they have a common interest and find that spark of commonality that emerges. It is not imposed upon them. So the third aspect of this dynamic is circulation. We've talked lots about that, people moving around from place to place and gaining access to knowledge and access to these resources. The fourth is stickiness. Place still matters in the invisible college. It does matter whether you're in a location where you have the infrastructure, the resources, the equipment, the people, the critical mass to innovate. So there is a matter of place, and it's not necessarily an inequity to have place, because sometimes the advancement of that science requires that level of and that scale of commitment, and that so place is still important. But at the same time, we have this other dynamic that I think we all intuitively understand is very, very powerful, which is distribution. That knowledge is more easily distributed because of information technology, because of the ease of travel, and also because of the reduction over the last 20, 25 years of some of the hard political boundaries that kept people apart, like the Cold War and so on. So I suggest that these are the factors, and they don't make a nice thing like thick, but I suggest these are the forces that are driving the invisible college, and that you can see in the data when you look at the extent of international collaboration in science. It's going up nearly exponentially, and in all fields. It's not simply limited to a few fields of science. Some fields became globalized earlier than others, but all of them are globalizing at a relatively similar rates. So if we try now to understand how do we bring and encourage developing countries to join this system, if we see knowledge and a knowledge-based economy as a value and as something that will help developing countries indeed come into this knowledge system and create knowledge-based economies, we do need to know how this system is organized and how it operates. And so this is offered in great detail in the book, this question about the organization of science. But obviously one aspect of it is a top-down. Top-down still operates within science. One of our presenters talked about mega projects. There's still mega science. It's a very small percentage, actually, of all the science, but it's very visible. People have heard about Large Hadron Collider. They've heard about the space station and the Human Genome Project. These are famous things, but they're a very small percentage of all the international collaboration that actually goes on. In fact, most of the international collaboration is bottom-up, and that's down at the bottom of the chart. And then we have this new dynamic of centralized research on the right and distributed research on the left, where the distributed research is indeed shared tasking around the world, not simply just scientists who talk to each other. It is that there are research projects in which different people in different places take on a task, and then the knowledge is reintegrated at a team level. So what we see now is a lot more teaming, a lot more interdisciplinarity in science, and much, much more collaboration. And that happens at the distributed level and also at the centralized location. Sometimes you have to go to the rainforest if you're studying rainforest ecology. So you have to go to a place. There's still place in science. It doesn't exist completely virtually. So I suggest then that each of those dynamics helps to create kind of a quadrant within which the way in which you would manage and understand how to help those sciences to develop would be treated differently. So the really good news, the thing to me that is the most exciting part about understanding this new invisible college is something that physicists and biologists have been teaching us the last 10 or 15 years, and that is research about the dynamics of networks. And what they have found in books, popular books like Linked and like Blink, and they tend to have one-word names, is that these networks operate by rules. They are not random. The relationships that we form are not random, nor are they something that can be predicted. They are only probabilistic relationships. But the simple rules of organization are embedded in the actors, and these kind of simple rules create these growth conditions for networks. So, and again, think about if we have to go back to the teenager example, but if you have a group of people and want to see how they're going to organize, what you find is that you often have a single person who is a hub or a single group that's a hub. And Todd Olson was telling me about his group, the material science group, that all of a sudden discovered they are a hub. They're a hub. They have lots and lots of groups and people connected to them. And there are reasons why people connect. And they are self-organizing kinds of dynamics. People come together seeking a resource, and they expect to have a resource exchanged in return. This is a very important aspect of network analysis and network understanding. So what we see then is within these networks that incentives are really what incites action, that you are incented, there is some reason why you seek that resource that the network is offering to you. You want to go to a party, or you want to get some new knowledge from the biologist who is working in Germany, or there's some money put out for people to explore a certain kind of science. So the interactive rules then of human networks govern the exchange. So this is when I'm working with developing countries, I tell them that in order to join the network, you have to have something to offer. You cannot just say, here I am. You have to have something to offer. And developing countries have lots to offer. They have interesting problems. They have interesting questions. They have resources to offer. Lots of times they have data. They have local access and so on. They need to make themselves interesting to the global science community, and lots of times that is true, and they understand that intuitively. So these interactive rules are reciprocal, and they're cooperative, and they help. I think once you can lay them out, you can help people to understand that this isn't a random experience, but it also isn't a one way. You have to have an exchange. So the dynamic of what's called preferential attachment, which is that the likelihood of being attached to the next person depends on how attached that person already is, or that group already is in the network. So this guides this dynamic and helps systems to evolve over time or to break apart. So, for example, people sometimes say, well, is this collaboration sustainable? Well, maybe you don't want it to be sustainable. Perhaps coming together and exchanging knowledge just for a few months is enough. So they come together and they break apart. So in a lot of ways, then, they naturally organize, they form, and they self-organize into collaborative sharing activities, and then they break apart when that network, when that connection is no longer useful to them. So there's terms out there like weak links and small worlds and redundancy. These are all terms that come out of network dynamics and help us to understand how these networks operate. And at the global level, science is only a network. That's it. There's no institution. There's no global ministry. There's nothing organizing it. And yet, when I go, and when you go to institutions around the world, you will find the Chinese scientist is working with a German scientist, with somebody from Colombia. Chilean scientist is working with somebody from Spain. Nobody put them together. They came together because of this social dynamic, because of the drive towards this looking for that knowledge, the resources, and having something to offer to the network. So out of all of this exchange, out of all of these underlying sort of rules of exchange, you have this social capital that is created, which results in its own norms and values that people then begin to understand when they're in that group, right? When you're in a group, you begin to learn the language and the norms and values, but it's not transparent. In fact, as I said, it's very highly structured. It's not easy to come into that network. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's a lot harder than the popular kids at high school network is to get into. Okay, because you have to learn the language of science. You have to know the language of exchange. You have to know where to get funding and so on. So all of these things act as barriers, right, to entering the network. They're passive barriers. They're not active exclusions, but they are barriers. And these are real barriers to people in developing countries when they try to enter this invisible college. And they tend to look at like the big science and say, could I get into that? Well, that's not where the science is actually happening. They need to understand these sort of underlying dynamics in the invisible college. So people talked about metaphors, and I often like to use the metaphor of an ecosystem or a garden. If you have a bunch of soil that's actually rich soil, something's going to grow there. Lots of times if you don't tend your garden, you'll have a lot of volunteers. But if you want a certain kind of output, you have to have a measured kind of input, and you have to understand the ecosystem and the way in which that ecosystem is going to nurture certain kinds of plants. You're not going to plant, watermelon if you're in Canada, and so you have to understand the ecosystem as well as the feedback loops within your ecosystem and how it will nurture certain kinds of growth. So I think that what we're about as a group, if we're trying to look at ways in which we bring new members into this knowledge system, into the Invisible College, we need to understand that ecosystem and how it works, and also not try to dig up the plant every day to see how the roots are growing. You have to give it time and be patient. So one of the ways, and one of the things I've found over and over in my research, is that more than 90% of collaborations in science begin face-to-face. I'm going to repeat that. It's so important. More than 90% of all collaborations in science begin face-to-face. So you really have to facilitate interaction among the actors. You have to get them in the same room. You have to bring them to seminars or bring people there. This is how scientific knowledge and linkages begin. They rarely start with somebody from a developing country writing an email to somebody at MIT and saying, here I am. Okay, that's not how the dynamic operates. And so that's one of the things we need to think about if we want to bring these developing countries into the knowledge system. The second is we need to create those incentives to organize. I think that's clear, and we've talked lots about that. We have to establish goals and invite champions. The role of champions cannot be overstated, because what happens is that champion is that attractive node in the network. That is the person around whom others will gather. So it's really important to get a champion. Then we have to create the conditions for sharing. So things like grid computing and ways in which people exchange information. Allow the team itself to outline their own rules of interaction. Don't tell them how to do their team. They have to organize that themselves. But from a policy perspective, what policymakers can do is provide information about the, quote, landscape on which these players are operating within their ecosystem. Tell them about what's happening in the weather. How is the weather? What's the weather like? What's happening in the garden down the street? Okay, that's very, very important, and that's a role for public policy. So if we try to think then, let's think about science beyond the nation state. Let's think of it as beyond a national asset. This structure is neither flat nor national, and nor is it visible. Okay? The system is influenced by policy, but only at the periphery. So policymakers can't control what happens. They can only nudge the system this way, that way. And sometimes the system is so locked in, it's not going to move. And you just have to accept that. Communications and attachment, seeking recognition and reward, these are the underlying rules by which the global Invisible College operates. And policies, I suggest to you, policies that are in line with the actual structure of the Invisible College are going to have a much greater chance of succeeding to develop science than these sort of structured, top-down, ministerially based, institution-based policies. So that is my story, and I have my book out there. I really look for comments, feedback. I love to hear from people, and I will also be happy to pass out my business card if you'd like to send me an email. So thank you for your kind attention.
That was good. She rates high on the perky scale too, right? You almost wave your arms around more than me. I don't like that kind of competition. Okay. You had a PowerPoint, I assume, sir? Okay. Do you know the name of it? Is it this one, the social approach?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I can get it then. All right.
Yes.
Let's get it into the right mode. Ta-da. Here's the man.
All right.
This is the guy came up here from Mexico. And I feel bad I did give her a full intro. The one thing that I do want to note is that he is an anthropologist with a PhD in economics. and has worked at professor in universities all throughout Central and South America. And his main topics of research are environmental health and nanotechnology issues. And I like the order. Whoever thought the order, was it probably you, Rachel? The order's perfect. We got this broader issue. Now we're going to go into the specific, I guess, this is your part in the invisible college. Yeah. Nanotech. Take it away.
Thank you. My presentation is about the proposals, the existing proposals on nanotechnology development for equity. I will start with a classification of the main proposals, and then I will look at the development of nanotechnology over the last 10 years to take some conclusions and show some gaps in the previous proposals, and also to show some possible paths. So I will give a big picture in 15 minutes in nano time. These are the main three non-contradictory and in some cases complementary conceptions that shape nanotechnology. First, nanotechnology to increase competitiveness. Second, nanotechnology in specific sectors like water, energy, medicine. Third, both of the two previous ones, plus policies, specific policies, usually financial and regulation, to guarantee equitable distribution of benefits. And I will suggest that the three of them represent technical approaches. They do not take in account the social forces that can foster a pro-equity approach, so a social approach is needed. The first one, to increase competitiveness. Well, this is very easy to find in most of the national nanotechnology initiatives. It is explicit, for example, in the case of the US initiative, also in the European Union initiative, and also in Brazil and many other Latin American countries. It suggests a mechanical path that the increase in competitiveness conduces to development and, though, to equity. But this is not true. There are a lot of countries that can increase competitiveness and has shown increase in competitiveness and inequity at the same time, like Mexico over that decade, and this without taking into account the 500,000 Mexicans that cross the border every year over those years. The second way of thinking about nanotechnology is for specific sectors. This approach recognizes that competitiveness by itself is not enough. So it is focusing on key sectors like water, medicine, energy, and it suggests that focusing on these sectors, people will have more equity and access to these products. But in a capitalist society, there is a double metamorphosis. First, products must become commodities. They acquire prices to satisfy needs. If there are more profitable investments, then there will not be investments in those strategic areas. And the case is, just look at the database of the Wilson Center, and you will see that most of the products are sumptuary products. In the second metamorphosis is that buyers must have purchasing power, money to acquire commodities, what is not usually true in most of developing countries. Every year, millions of tons of different food products are thrown out in spite of millions of people starving. So the problem is not to produce something, but how to get to the end user. There is a third approach to nanotechnology, and this combines the first two with policies to guarantee equitable distribution of benefits. This approach recognizes that competitiveness and nanotechnology development in key sectors are necessary but not enough, and proposes an agenda focused on research and development, collaboration agreements, global funds, etc. But this proposal neither relies on the social forces that can push forward a pro-poor agenda, nor considers the trends that reproduce inequity. These three conceptions represent a technical approach to the problem. Why? Because they conceptualize development as a matter of obtaining more, better, or better distributed stuff, meaning a relation between people and things, not an interrelation between people. In second place, do not alter the forces that bound inequity with market relations. And in third, rely on market laws to overcome inequity or inequality. So, what has the development of nanotechnology in the last decade shown? First, the awareness of potential risks of nanotechnology for workers and consumers and of the economic implication for developing countries did not come from business or government, but from NGOs and some academic institutions. The increase in the governmental agenda of regulation issues, specifically over the second part of the last year and this year, came after key non-governmental organization documents, ETC Group, Friends of Earth, and trade unions' declarations, Australia, IUF, it took enlarged social coalitions as the declaration of ICTA in 2007, and when they reached the media. So what a social approach to nanotechnology development should consider? First, empowering these social organizations to increase the chances of driving nanotechnology towards social ends. Social organizations are keen in identifying socioeconomic barriers, and they are also the force that can change pre-existing inequality trends. Second, defining research and development priorities by social needs instead of or besides market competitiveness, as is the case usually. Third, vertical integration of public research and development, production, and products distribution instead of public funding for first steps in research and development and leaving the rest to the market. That is usually the case, and I will take a few minutes in this last one. Because in most of the cases, for example in Latin America, in all of the cases, there is a small initial amount of funds for research and development, and the governmental agencies that found this, they rely on the market to fulfill the whole chain. They think that once they gave this kickoff of the first fund, the business sector will take on and continue with the research and will produce and will sell the products. But this is not usually the case, and it is not specifically the case with a new technology that has no market experience in the chain relationship. It is very difficult even to find the raw materials. Most companies that use nanoparticles as raw materials, they don't even know what are they buying in terms that they cannot prove them. They don't know what the outcome in the product will be. They have several difficulties in guaranteeing the quality of these raw materials. Most of them can't even measure them. So the chains, the productive chains, are not established because it's a new change. This means that if the state does not promote the continuation of the research and development until the last stages, that do not assume the production of the products, and of course that do not produce and get to the public the products, then the outcome will be that only the large corporations will monopolize the production of nanotechnology products. But in the case, at least, of Latin America, we have this possibility, because the state has traditionally an important history in producing, not only in researching, in producing, and in taking the products to the final consumers, at least in strategic areas as energy, precisely, as health, and, for example, transportation also. So there are the institutions, the organizations, and the possibilities to make this whole change true in the case of nanotechnology, although this is not being done. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Didn't even have to put my threatening 5 minutes to go sign. Good man, good man. All right, I'm going to call from the back. We're switching the order slightly. Romas Berg is coming to speak. I speak German too, by the way. I was really excited to hear that you speak German. Romas is, well, I should have started off saying, speaking of building the capacity to empower social organizations to drive emerging technology to serve inequality, we have someone from Ashoka coming up. That's what I should have said. Coming on down the line here. Oh, do we have PowerPoint slipping on in? Okay, she's good. Romanis, he's the CIO for Ashoka, where his team develops and manages a global... Am I like too much in your way? No, keep going. Can I read and stay out of her way at the same time? Manages global operations, performing... let me start over. He's a good man, whose bio I can't read clearly.
Good man will do.
He is a good man. He went to University of Maryland, so you're kind of part local too, which I like. But so what do you, this is a really funky bio here. It doesn't tell me, are you going to tell, why don't you start off and tell us what you do? No, it was kind of it's one of those, it sounds real pretty, but I didn't know quite what it meant. But I mean, basically, we do know that Ashoka, they give, a big part of their work is, is to promote social entrepreneurship. And by supporting the and I think this kind of bespeaks your bottom-up actors, you really set a good tone for us, ma'am. That, the bottom-up actors, and, and in some ways, I think Ashoka, how you operate, a lot of Ashoka people actually end up belonging, that are related to China, end up working in my network as well. You got it there? Yeah. All right.
You don't have to buy any more time.
I don't have to buy any more time. We're here. Romanis will tell you even better what he does. Because whoever sent this is
good at dancing.
You're good at dancing?
No
Okay, good. It's right down here. There it is. All right, this is you.
Thank you.
That's I am.
Hello, everyone. My name is Romanis. Very, very happy to be here. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for spending some time together. How many? Can I get a show of hands of how many folks here are familiar with Ashoka and the work that? Great. That's always heartening to see. So I'll keep the part about Ashoka very brief, only in the context of relevance. So just a few words about Ashoka. Ashoka, I heard the word network used. We talked a lot about trust. We talked about ground-up innovation. Ashoka represents the world's largest network of social entrepreneurs. We have 2,000 fellows in over 66 countries. Currently, an example of a Ashoka fellow is Mohammed Yunus, who, as you probably know, won the Nobel Peace Prize for microfinance. And really, the premise to Ashoka, which is very relevant to this room, I think, is 30 years ago, Bill Drayton looked at the developing markets, looked at the developing world, and recognized that we in the developed world would be spending billions of dollars trying to implement concepts conceived of in absentia that had no local relevance, not the local trust of the networks, and were not going to yield results on the investments that we were making. And so 30 years ago, he recognized that he really needed to go to the source in the areas, in the subject matters, in the regional compartmentalizations that we see, and find the social entrepreneurs that are actually disrupting the way things were happening. These are the engineers that were breaking log jams, finding new ways. And so 30 years ago, I would say that I personally think that he got it right, which is why I'm very honored to be working with such a wonderful network of social entrepreneurs. But we also recognize that in a very humble way, this is a larger ecosystem, and no one institution, no one network can get this thing done. In truth, this network that we see here, many other networks, government organizations, private sector organizations, we all have to figure out a new way forward. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And it's very encouraging to see so many smart folks working together, talking about what the future really holds. And so in following on the science fiction quote earlier, I thought we would just maybe pull up a Gibson quote, which says basically, the future's already here, it's simply unevenly distributed. And what we're doing here that's very encouraging is we're finding that future together. And it's not predetermined, but it exists in pockets. So what is that path that we want to follow? Very quickly, as I alluded to 30 years ago, the model for this network, which is relevant, I think, also here to this, what's starting here, is that you start with social entrepreneurs who are the nodes, the folks that actually are aggregators of networks themselves. You then move to group entrepreneurship, where you bring these folks together in larger constructs. And I think the beauty is, because Ashoka is always working at the leading edge of innovation, we have a way of the world leading us where it needs to go, where the social problems exist. And then last but not least, which I think is the phase that we're now passing, is the idea that we're building infrastructure for an entire sector. And what we see now is that actually the sectors are all coming together. I was just at Clinton Global Initiative. If it's not more apparent that corporate, government, and citizen sectors, the bridges are really shortening. I'm not going to say they're not there, but they're certainly shorter than they were before. Clearly, we're at another historical moment. Everyone in the room recognizes this. The demand for solutions in the world is increasing. One of the wonderful things about networks of social entrepreneurs is they see solutions where others only see challenges. And I think if you look at the pace of the citizen sector, it is outpacing private and government spending in many regions in the world, certainly in the North American markets. And you see them in Brazil. It's really growing exponentially. And I personally believe that, in a way, it's the market meeting a demand, and the demand for solutions is clearly there, and the supply side is responding. This is actually part of another slide. Since I happen to be in technology, the only way that you can actually get to scale is if you combine the right folks with the right community of practice with the right tools. That's always been the case, I would say. So rather than talk about all these sort of theoretical ideas, I thought I would just highlight 4 fellows so that we can, and my personal belief is nothing begets replication and imitation like examples of success. So what exactly is a fellow? And let's take some examples. And feel free to pause me or have me focus on something that's more or less relevant.
One of your that's like the champions you talk about.
Yeah. These are the network. These are when we look at team of teams or network of networks, these are folks that are natural aggregators that see challenges in their communities and actually respond in a very tangible way that has impact on smallholder participants. So Vincent Bagir, he was elected to the fellowship in, I think, about 2004, was using ICT technology, simple handheld phones, in his community to share the cost of access and donating the phones to smallholder, small farmer participants in teaching them communities better practices around increasing their crop yield. So simple things like, what do I do if I have an infestation? What do I do when we have a drought? How are we sharing? And what we found, of course, is what he found, of course, is that a lot of this artisanal knowledge is locked into communities of trust, i.e. families or small regions. And by developing this network around 17 districts of people having cell phones that are actually just SMSing and sharing knowledge, he was able to increase in the 17 districts around him crop yields by over 30%. in many cases, not in all, but in many. What happened is that you have an adoption of technology that never would have happened before, and you literally have the smallholder participant who never would have had access to, a global knowledge base, i.e., the cloud, if it wasn't for smallholder participants, seeing the value here, and basically they're able to pay for the phone and the access now out of a fraction of their increased yields. This is, if I remember correctly, this is Africa. I'll remember where in a minute. Adrian McBecky, in contrast, is in India, who also is helping farmers. And what he's doing is he used ICT technology to allow folks to get access to market information. So when the broker came calling and said, I'll give you such and such for your crop, he said, the farmer, he or she, would then say, no, you need to give me a better deal because I know what the market price is, and we need to actually start to work together a little bit. You can't, you can't broker, you can't be a hoard of this knowledge anymore. So he sort of broke out of that. Just a specific example, so you can see how that's transformative. And so one of the things that we find that I personally find so intriguing being in technologies is because the fabric of technology is making the world smaller and smaller, it's now possible more than ever before to link an Adrian and a Vincent and say, Vincent, you're actually helping to increase crop yields. Adrian, you've got an access to market play. Why don't we help you on the same technology? And I chose them because they happen to be working in very down-to-earth, not leading-edge technologies that are actually transforming the way that folks are able to really help themselves and transform the way that they're operating. That's one side of the spectrum when you're really on the ground. If you look at Jimmy Wales, who is the founder of Wikipedia, you look at someone who is what we would call a senior fellow, who is further down the line in terms of his personal development, because he is now at a place where he's actually globally affecting. He's broken out of sort of those regional silos in his communities, and he's actually now having a global influence on a global network. And what's amazing about someone like Jimmy Wales is he'll say, he's a very modest guy, and he'll say, look, all I've done is put a simple process in place to improve the quality of information and access to it. And then he modestly goes on and says, well, we serve 300 million, users, and he thinks it's probably a little bit of a, underestimate, low estimate. So, really someone who's transforming our ability to crowdsource information in a meaningful way. Last one in this sort of deck is Amidar, who is the founder of Idealist, who I think is relevant in our context because he's one of those typical examples of a networker of networks. Because what he does is he's taking, and I talked about the supply side and demand side a moment ago, we really do have a lot of folks that want to participate in social change. They just don't know how. And we have a lot of folks that are participating in social change and they don't have the resources. And I mean, the crime that drives me crazy every day is that many of these social initiatives really do have the capacity to have a much larger impact and much larger reach. The beauty of a network like this is that you're not sector-specific like healthcare, nanotechnology, bioscience, or anything else that you could find. What we find is that some things that are not innovations in one particular field are innovations in another, and by having this larger network that's based on trust, and I heard a lot about that earlier as well, a network that's based on trust that can cross-pollinate these things is one that actually can begin to allow us to meet that exponentially growing demand curve. Because right now, with the way things currently stand, our ability to meet the growing curve of the growing curve of demand for solutions is not exponential, and it's certainly not meeting our current needs. With that, I had one link that I thought, again, nothing begets. Let's see if I can get this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go find it. Give me a second.
I don't know if it should. Did you tell AV to have it on?
Yeah, I try to click it out. Well,
maybe just get out your PowerPoint.
It's okay. I'll just go ahead and find it real quick. No problem. So this is the part where I dance. It's
not like the hamster dance.
Exactly. I hope it's. I'm German, so it's not that pretty. Let's see. If you.
I don't know if it's connected. Was it on earlier?
Is there audio? And if not, I can direct you to it. I mean, I can give you the link and we can find it later.
Yeah, you might have to, with the audio.
That's fine.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine, no problem. So I'll tell you what you were going to see, which is both Adrian and Vincent talking about what they do from their perspective, which is always really, from my perspective, humbling, because what we're really talking about is enabling change, not dictating it, not constructing it. And so the social entrepreneurs really are the glue. But let's not. I think the other thing that's really important for me to mention is that it's not about an elitist point of view. It's certainly not about who has the better ideas. It's about an everyone a change maker world. And so where we go from the old way where you had knowledge that was hoarded in one particular location, you now go to a world where you demonstrate power and get merit in networks like Ashoka's Fellow Network by giving it away. And that's how you get power in a network like this. And that's ultimately the way that you enable from the bottom up the changes that we wish to see, because there's no way on God's earth, I should say, excuse me, that we are going to be able to either do this alone or in a overly structured way that's prescriptive rather than predictive.
Okay. So during the Q&A, you can ask him to dance, I'm believing. Okay. So we're kind of close out. It's kind of this also fits in very nicely because we kind of went down to the grassroots and we're opening back up, but still keeping with a lot of the trends that were in the opening talk with our. I still love that your title of your book, The Invisible College. It rocks. We've got Susan Cozens, who is an associate dean for research at the Ivan Allen College of Humanities and Social Sciences. She's been active in science and innovation policy for over 25 years. Told you before, she's going to talk about this cross-national, cross-technology study. And you have a PowerPoint with your name on it. Dancing involved? Is there any dancing involved in this one?
I love dancing.
All right.
Let's go.
Yeah, I think we could have a vote. It is the last day. The Q&A could turn into a mosh pit up here in the front. No, sorry. You guys will draw the line somewhere. All right. It's your job to close this out. Try to do it in like 15 minutes.
Of course.
Of course. So then we'll have time for that mosh pit. Okay.
You can even just stand up and wave at me if you tell me about time. Okay,
We'll all
so
do
I've
the
been
wave.
very aware of the fact that I'm the very last speaker on the program, which is a very tough position to be in because it's been such a rich conference, and we've brought in so many ideas. I think we've actually moved quite a ways from where we were 2 days ago when we started to now. So what I have planned to do, instead of just giving you the details of this project, is to do something that's going to be a little more summary and commentary. It does actually draw on the research project that Jennifer's been mentioning, which was supported by NSF, and we looked at distributional consequences of 5 technologies that emerged a while back in 8 different national contexts, 4 in the global north and 4 in the global south. It also draws on work that we've done on innovation systems in water and sanitation, specifically in developing countries, and also on work that's going on in a thematic research cluster in the Center for Nano in Society at Arizona State, work that I'm doing collaboratively with Jamie Wetmore, and on a workshop that we had last fall about this time. And what I'm going to do actually is use slides that I developed for a training session that was held in the fall. What I tried to do from all this learning was draw out just a little recipe for doing equity and equality assessment in relation to an emerging technology. So I came up with 9 steps for a hypothetical decision maker or staffer to follow in taking up these issues. And if you want details on it, there will be a chapter in the upcoming yearbook that Jamie and I are editing and that will go off to the publisher this month. So the scenario we gave people in the fall was that they were staffers for a national decision maker or a decision-making body that was designing a nanotechnology initiative, and they wanted to make sure that everybody benefited from it. What should they do? What does this research base tell them to do? I think that there are applications of these ideas then in the projects that we've been working on here, which border a bit on designing international initiatives in nanotechnology that we want to have benefit everyone. We actually started out with definitions of equity and equality. We've been getting closer to actually discussing what fairness is and what equity is today in this conference, but for a lot of the conference, we've just used them as though we already know what that means. Our definitions are grounded in philosophical theories of distributive justice. And the equity definition is based on Rawlsian theory, for those of you who know this, that a distributive system is fair or just if the least advantaged in the system benefit from it. The manifestation of that in science, technology, and innovation policy is really the pro-poor policies and programs, and we have talked a lot about that in this conference. That's where we've been focusing. The equality criterion, however, derives from ethical theory as well, because there's no ethical theory out there anywhere that says that anything that people value should be unequally distributed based on ascriptive characteristics, the culturally defined stuff, including gender, including ethnicity or race, including ability status. And Barbara, bless her soul, brought this in yesterday, but it hasn't been taken up very much in the conversation. And the set of policies and programs that address those issues I refer to as fairness policies to distinguish them from the other set. So we pointed out to these folks in September that it really made a big difference in their design of this initiative, what kind of country they were in, a lot of important characteristics of national environments. If that's true for the national decision makers or staffers, it's even more true for these imagined international initiatives that we've been putting together, that they really have to be tailored to a set of local circumstances, which are political, they're economic, they're educational. There are a lot of things that go into it. So step one in the assessment is to inventory the inequalities that are out there. And in particular, we were explicit that this should be done in two different dimensions. The vertical dimension of inequality, this is terminology that I picked up from Frances Stewart in the development literature. The vertical dimension is the rich-poor dimension. And frankly, usually if you're in a rich country and you're doing science, technology, and innovation policy, you forget about this dimension completely. That's really not true in a number of developing countries where there are huge, huge gaps that have political implications and more attention is paid to it. But the point of putting it on the list is to keep it in mind, that vertical dimension, and then the horizontal dimension of inequality does cut across those culturally defined groups, gender, ethnicity, religion, etc. And of course, different ones of these, what it means to be a woman is different in different countries. The ethnicities or race issues are different in different contexts. So we asked them, the assembled group, to actually do the first exercise, which is just take out a little piece of paper and write down what you know about the vertical and horizontal inequalities in your country. And let me ask now, how many of you out there can tell me what percentage of the population in your country lives below your national poverty line? 1, okay. 2, 3, 4. But you're about where this group was in September, too, which is that actually we don't hold information about these inequalities in mind, but if we're trying to design equitable programs, we have to keep it in mind. So that's where I came up with my recommendation of the 3x5 card. Write down some of this stuff and then keep it next to your computer with everything else you do. Carry it in your breast pocket if you want to, but at any rate, keep it in mind. That's actually the essence of the analysis. Step 2 was listening, and we have already talked a lot about listening over the last couple of days. The main form of listening that was coming out early in the discussions was listening in the context of a particular technology. We had Chopra's advice to do customer-oriented marketing. We had Jose's stories about co-creation of particular technologies that we were trying to fit into particular places. The listening admonition, when you think at program level, when you think broadly about an initiative, really has to happen at a higher level. And we don't have good mechanisms for doing that listening to disadvantaged communities on both the vertical and horizontal dimension. I will side in the conversation that Barbara and Rick had yesterday about the appropriateness of citizens forums on this. I will go with Barbara on it. I think the citizens forum mechanism that we have a lot of experience with doesn't do a good job of listening to disadvantaged communities because they get mixed up, and it's also very oriented to highly educated groups. So we need some new mechanisms here, and in the Arizona State group, we're actually going to try experimenting with some of those. Okay, step 3 was add a better life dimension to your national nanotechnology initiative, and let me show you here with this what a normal national program would go through in a process called foresight. First, they'd think about local capabilities, S&T capabilities. This came up at one point in our conversation. Oh, yeah, take into account what expertise exists locally. But we haven't talked about that very much here. The second dimension would certainly be commercial opportunities in the standard science, technology, and innovation policy. And Guillermo has just ripped this to shreds, but this would be the standard thing. So the admonition here was add the better life dimension, add the potential of the technologies for improving lives for people at the bottom of the income distribution, and take into account the horizontal inequalities as well. Is that better life going to be particularly for men, particularly for women, etc. From there, of course, what we have done here is to focus on the better life potential. And we've been a little ambivalent in the discussions about the commercial potential area. Do you need that? Do you not need that? But this diagram kind of reminds you that most of the national decision makers who are really big in this area are going to take the commercial potential into account first. So the conversation here has been a good corrective for that. Step 4 is to think about employment generation in relation to the nanotechnologies that you're considering. And I am always interested in jobs that produce incomes that are at the middle of the income distribution, because that reduces income inequality. And they are often neglected in the early stages of talking about a new technology. Those strategies, I give a different name, the egalitarian name. Examples of doing this well include the way electronics production developed. I haven't, and I look for this a lot, but I have not heard any evidence that suggests that nanotechnology production is going to produce anything like the number of jobs that microelectronics production produced. And so if you do projections from microelectronics into nano, you're probably wildly overstating what's going to happen in terms of employment. I put the Korean example on this slide because Korea, turns out when you go and you look at what was happening with men and women in the workforce, in Korea, the whole Korean miracle, the export miracle, was built on the gender gap, the wage gap in genders in the Korean workforce, that they were bringing women in who had not been in the workforce before, paying them at low levels. And as soon as the gap with men's salaries started to close up, the exports fell off and they opened the gap up again. It's a rather remarkable story, and we don't want to do that. We care about who gets the jobs, and we want to have equality on that horizontal dimension. Okay. 5 was set the conditions for widespread commercialization, which gets us into this intellectual property area that we should have future conferences on, I think, because it's so complicated. What our case studies from that earlier work lead to as a bottom line is that if it's shareable, it will produce more commercial opportunities. It's not just that people will get a chance to use it, but they'll have a chance to set up more businesses on the basis of it. And there are a lot of creative ideas going on in this area that now is the time to pursue them in relation to nano, actually. Risks, uneven distribution of risk. We've talked about risk, we've talked about unevenness, but we haven't talked about the two together. And I've actually learned a lot from Guillermo on this in his work for our yearbook. In the risk society, privileged groups try to protect themselves from risks. And that sets up a certain pattern. That means that workers, whether they're production workers producing the nanomaterials or whether they're using the nanomaterials, that's where risk is going to be concentrated if we don't know what they are. Countries of the South will take on more of that risk if they're doing production, but also because they don't have the risk regulation infrastructure of the North often. And if they just count on what's going on in the North in terms of regulation, then a lot of their problems are not going to be addressed because they are agricultural. And the big risk issues are going to be different in the North. The last point about working on prevention rather than mitigation is somebody gets hurt and they scream and then we do something to try and fix the problem. Well, if it's the disadvantaged groups that are getting hurt, they're much less likely to scream. So there's a lot of unevenness in the distribution of risks, but also in the costs of regulation that we try to use to fix them. If you think of regulation as kind of a tax, think about who's paying the tax and who's getting the benefit from it. The costs are often just dumped on somebody somewhere along the production chain, and the benefits are very widely spread. So thinking about how to get that more evenly distributed is important. I'll tell you about the Czech farmers in question and answer. The point number 8 for these imaginary nano initiatives was to think about global relationships. And here, this is a point that actually was made early in our conference and continues to be made, which is that that countries of the North, and let me just take them first, need to actually have the whole world economy growing in order for them to grow. And so building business relationships around nano or other emerging technologies in a way that builds economic growth in the partners as well as in the firm in the North is to everybody's benefit. And not all the big corporations do that when they try to hang on to their IP and gather up all the profits in the North. And then finally, the last step is to experiment with some of those redistributional policy and program designs. What's a redistributional policy or program design? We know there's inequality out there now. In my mind, we're not going to do a lot about fixing that inequality that already exists, but what we can do is with new things that are being added, do redistribution, create more equity, do pro-poor fairness and egalitarian policy options so that at least what's new that's being added on makes the whole system better. So there are a lot of places that you can go to get a lot more detail about this. This is kind of a very simple presentation. I have an article on distributive justice. Rafi and I have a chapter in a book that's just coming out, and I have another chapter on innovation and inequality in a book that should be out early next year. And we have also presented a number of papers at professional meetings on the two projects that I was talking from. Barbara did promise me that I would get the last word from the presenters, at least at the meeting, but I really think that it should go to Moses. And the quote that Rick read from him, that the time for nanotechnology to come on board is now because the problems are really pressing. So let's do it.
Right. All right, I'd like my mini mafia to come on up here, you innovative science and tech people. And now you in the audience, it's your job. In closing out, we want to end up with dynamic questions, right? Oh, and there she is. And I've got Rachel.
Erica.
Well, that's Erica. Oh, where's? I thought you were also. No, I'm sorry. I thought someone told me that there was Rachel. Sorry, wrong name, Erica. Sorry. Okay.
Chan Huang from United Nations University, Merit. I have 2 questions. First to Susan. About that, you talk about IPR systems. So since that the TRIPS well in place in the WTO, so do you think that it's possible for developing countries to patent and to grab the opportunity to develop if the letters for development was kicked out by the multinational companies? The first question. Second question is for Carolina. You argue against nationalism in the global network of scientific research, but would you like to accommodate the fact that most of the funding for scientific research still come from the national organization agencies? So in Europe, European Commission pretty open up for the framework program for the third countries, non-European countries to participate. But I think the proposal by European Commission was very much released by member states to open up the national framework to the non-European countries or even within European countries to participate. That's my question.
Okay.
Shall I take TRIPS
start
or the World Intellectual Property System? First, I think it's really there are some fundamentally good things about patent protection that are being terribly distorted in the way that it's currently being implemented and practiced, particularly by large firms that set up patent strategies of various sorts. I think the TRIPS march-in provisions are certainly a good thing, but they're a bit of a Band-Aid on a kind of diseased system, if I can put it a little strongly. So I think that that we really need to change that. We need to have ideas flowing and opportunities for using them for business or public purposes opened up and not remaining in the stranglehold. Our example from the biotechnology study is recombinant insulin, which was the very first biotechnology health product. The patents have long since expired, and Lilly managed to hang on to this thing and keep the generics from being produced for a number of years afterwards. The people died because they didn't have that insulin, and that's what I'm talking about as a pathology of the system. So I think we have to maybe go back to traditional things like time limits on patents. If firms from the South use the system in the same way that firms from the North have, it'll cause just as much damage. Let me say that.
Caroline?
Great question. Very important question. I want to make 3 points about it, but the first one sounds general, but it will come around to answering your question. In my lifetime, certainly in the lifetimes of a number of people in here, we've gone through a tremendous change, social change, and that is we've gone from an era of information scarcity to an era of information abundance. And I would suggest that the era of information abundance that we've come into is still carrying along with it some of the what would you call it, the vestiges of the old ways. And I would suggest patents is one of those. And the second is the national system of funding science. It seems to me that indeed, Romanas mentioned that knowledge hoarding is over and over again shown to be an ineffective way to do any kind of development, including commercial development. And so, if you Google open innovation and so on, and open in the information system, you'll see that more and more what is happening in the knowledge system is that people find that the more they share, and this is a network dynamic as well, the more you share, the more you get back. And so the final aspect of that, then, is the thing I suggest in my book. Science is a global public good. It's not patented, and it's shared relatively openly, with some barriers, of course. But if it is a global public good, then the implication for public policy is that nations must, and I think eventually will, move towards open funding. And that is where they fund the best science from wherever around the world the idea comes, and that the measure of the success of the funding is the extent to which that knowledge is brought back or brought from anywhere and made locally accessible and usable to the system. That's my answer.
Okay, and the next question right here in the red scarf. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, just keep the mics on, you guys.
May Anderson, Danish Technical University. Perhaps now's the time to be a little bit disagreeing, so I'll try. The presentation of Guillermo, the main message was that competitiveness is a technical way of thinking. I happen to disagree strongly. Those of us in this room who are economists, we are all evolutionary economists, institutional economists. And those kind of ways of looking upon the economy are quite different from the classical mainstream neoclassical approach of rational actors and arm's length markets. In our types, the way we see the market and how the economy works is very much a social endeavor. And social actors and social entrepreneurs are part of the market process of today's innovation systems. So I would argue very strongly that there's a strong need to review the way the market is viewed and considered amongst other social scientists who do not realize that there's a lot of things that are happening in economics. There's also a lot of things not happening. A lot of economists, by far the main amounts, are seeing the world and the economy in an entirely different way. Right now, because of the financial crisis, there's actually a big discussion amongst economists, a war more or less, where the institutional economists are, as usually, criticize the others, but now perhaps with a stronger force, saying that they failed to see the financial crisis coming up, which is actually leading these mainstream economies into a major crisis, you might say, which they haven't seen before. Also, I would argue that the climate agenda is threatening traditional economics too. What we are seeing now is a greening of markets, that environmental parameters are becoming part of the market. We're also seeing social parameters to some degree beginning to become part of the market through the corporate social responsibility trends. These are all extremely exciting trends which we need to realize and address amongst social scientists more broadly, and certainly also in this agenda where we are trying to look into both equity issues but also economic development issues. So I would argue to perhaps even ask all of the panelists, what we need to do mainly is not to empower social organizations as such. We need to try and influence on the competitive process. And that's what policies and social actors need to focus a lot more on. And competitiveness is not given; it is changing a lot, and we need to influence that very much, particularly in the developing countries.
Okay. Some quick responses, because we do want to end. Do we want to end promptly at 12:15, or can I take 12:20? You give me 12:20, because I'll smile nice at you, Richard. We're taking 12:20. Quick responses. Richard's like, oh, me banfa, as we say in Chinese. No choice. It's your house. It's my house, right? My husband says I'm dictatorial. Okay, so some quick responses or quick comments on this, because I think this could be a whole panel, this kind of like duking it out, which, you guys, we'll let you do it outside the Wilson Center. But yeah, I think it's you.
Well, it is not a response because that was not a question.
Yeah, that was... well, I was kind of like looking for some help here.
It's a different political position. Mm-hmm. So, as you said, we will need a whole panel to discuss this.
So you agree to disagree for the moment. All right. Okay. So we're going to move on. Right behind you. And then we're going to move the other side of the room because we want social, room equity as well. So,
Thanks.
So Natalie, can you give it to Richard? Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff Tansey.
Even distribution of risks.
I think the role that intellectual property plays is really very crucial, and a lot of you have come out saying critical of the system. The reality of the system today is that it's about creating scarcity, it's about keeping it, not giving it away, and as Usha said to me, it's about a license to sue people. That's what you give it for. And the reality of US and European policies, they're seeking an ever stronger enforcement of the existing rules under TRIPS. So and the kind of vision you've presented is absolutely counter to the current mainstream policy of this government in this country and in the European Union and in others, and of some of the developing countries who are beginning to think maybe that's the way we should go. So I think that is a huge issue that really is an area that needs following up. And on the science thing, I mean, isn't there scientists follow the money? I mean, let's face it, if 20 billion, if the money that's going into nanotech tomorrow decided to go into organic farming, it'd all be over in organic farming. There's a reality of where money is and where the money goes and who decides where that money goes. And that's what a lot of this discussion has been about in talking with farmers or individual groups. What is the needs and what would be the right way to direct the R&D? I loved Susan's stuff and very interesting from Romano, but he wasn't talking about the nanotech. He was talking about how social activities happen and what people use in those activities and things that are actually relatively uncontroversial and where the risks are not very uncertain as they are in what we're doing. So I think there's a big set of issues about where social entrepreneurship fits into this kinds of technological development. And it was really interesting, Susan, and the work you do, and I hope you can look at some of the work we've done in the Food Ethics Council where we use this mix of views, and also the work of IIED, if you know them, in the International Institute for Environment and Development in London, who are doing a lot of the kind of thinking you're doing in developing countries with communities.
Any response to his comments? This is just a conversation. Richard, right here.
So many questions, so little time. I would like Romanos to respond to the last question because I had the same question with Moses' quote up there, the pressing need for nanotechnology. Are there any high-tech examples? I also want to just make a comment on Caroline's hope that national governments will put aside their differences and fund more internationally. I share that hope, but sort of a discouraging note is I don't see much evidence of that currently, because funding is couched in terms of national competitiveness. That's how the National Nanotech Initiative was sold, and so little bits and pieces are put aside for the PIRE program and things like that. But the big money may involve international collaborators, but it's not, it's not a strategy yet. And if we had time, I would ask you to say, how can we get from here to there?
Okay.
So
Yeah, can I say a word on competitiveness? Because I always have a hard. There are certain people I talk to that have a hard time convincing that when you're talking about competitiveness in a firm, you're talking about people still having jobs if that firm is competitive. And so and actually think that firms need to be competitive. It means they're producing something that people want, and they're doing it better than anybody else is. But when you start applying competitiveness to research activities, the concept means nothing whatsoever to me. Mm-hmm. So all these benchmarking exercises with this, that, and the other thing, it just is stretching the term way too far.
Richard, go for it. That's you.
Maybe two things that would be helpful with the intent of finding common ground for things that we I think that are pretty clear. One is, when it comes to social innovation happening at the grassroots, the cat's out of the bag. I don't think that that's actually a trend that you can refute or that you can actually take a look at when you look at, for example, the number of citizen sector organizations that are being founded, or the growth of the revenue of these organizations. They're all increasing at a rapid pace, pretty much globally. So what I mean by that trend is that it's a proxy for seeing that, for noticing that there is a different way of operating, where there's a democratization of change making going on. And maybe one thing about what's occurring here in this room that really, I want to make one small point and then one general point. Well, the small point is just linking, for example, the example of Adrian McBecky and Vincent Bagir. These folks are natural aggregators of innovation. So if they, for example, nanotechnology in the hands of a social entrepreneur, you can see how, from a grassroots perspective, that then becomes a much different conversation than if you were looking at it from a top-down perspective. So the way we like to think about it is gentle top-down, but excite the base. And if the tool is actually adding value, if whatever the tool is, whether that's biomedical tool, whether it's nanotechnology, whether it's something in agriculture, if it is adding value to the smallholder participant, it will take hold. That's one point. And the second one is a more general one, which is, I spend a lot of time observing the fellow network from a perspective of team of teams and network of networks, and how that relates to us and how that relates to us globally. And that trust is this very interesting animal that is being, I think, so defining trust, one thing, and then noticing that trust is increasing in the world at a marginal pace. But what if you increase that trust by a few percent? What would that mean economically? What would that mean in terms of collaboration? So if we think about that for a moment, and think about what trust is this funny animal that is a combination of emotional and logical act. It has four cornerstones, roughly. First one is expectation of predictability, expectation of value exchange, expectation of eventual reciprocity, and the last one is the one that always interests me most, which is an expectation that one's weaknesses won't be exploited. And I just want to, when we're talking about networks of networks, when we're talking about what matters here, is when if you look at that as an indicator of economic success, and you look at social entrepreneurship as an indicator of economic viability, what you're really talking about is the ability of a community or a citizenship to make change and address social problems or whatever problems are coming their way. And that, I think, is the cat that's out of the bag when you're looking at the democratization of access to networks via the fabric of technology, whether that be nanotechnology or anything else.
Okay, I think you want to jump. Okay, sure.
Yeah, please. The new invisible college that I describe in my book is a completely emergent phenomenon. No government created it, nor would a government even dream of wanting to have knowledge exchanged at the global level in such a way that they lose control of it. Governments have no interest in that whatsoever. The invisible college, the global knowledge system, has its own dynamic. It is not a dynamic that can be controlled by governments, and we are in a time of tremendous change. I am describing in my book the system that's emerging, not the system that we've come from. We've come from a system of nations where several nations have had tremendous power, and in the same way that we saw in the Middle Ages, the church was the dominant social organizing force, and eventually we had nations emerge over that. The church is still there, and we still have nations. Over the nations now is emerging another social structure. And so as that happens, then, and in combination with the change in the way knowledge is created and exchanged, it will create the dynamic towards open funding. It's already happening if you look at the Global Knowledge Initiative, if you look at DFID, if you look at, I was on the UN Millennium Development Council on Science and Technology, this was one of our recommendations. These things are already happening. They will happen within the system, and it's not going, I don't expect big governments to lie down and say, we're laying the pathway for the new era. The new era will emerge, and some old parts of the system will resist. Eventually, though, my hope for change will be, in fact, that taxpayers will demand that any individual ministry of government be canvassing the entire world for good ideas to bring back to local solutions. That should be what we're asking of our bureaucrats and our policymakers. Are you going to rely simply on United States universities to solve problems, or are you going to look around the world for the best idea? If you're not doing that, you're not spending my tax dollars wisely. So I suggest that we can all move the Invisible College along by simply doing that and going locally and saying, where in the world do we link into interesting and important new ideas?
Okay, I think I'd like to. Can we leave it on like the hopeful note? Any more final questions? But we do. These guys got to do a final closeout, and your stomachs are grumbling. Did you have one quick question? I know you were very patient with you. Okay, well, Nellie, can you give it? And it's a question. I'm looking for questions, and they'll give you answers because that's what they do.
It was about the presentation, Caroline's presentation. Of course, there are a lot of positive impacts of international collaborations for developing countries, but there is also a dark side, and this is who sets the agenda? What are the problems that are addressed? Are they relevant for these other countries? Because sometimes I think that we in developing countries look for sound science in this collaboration and not science that will solve particular national problems. In this level, national borders are still important.
I would resonate with Guillermo's point that R&D that focuses on local conditions and local problems is often the more successful research because what it does is it sets down the local learning loop, which turns out to be extremely important in terms of having science stay local and become productive. And I think I would turn to you to perhaps make some comments about how to do that. How could we help to make R&D more locally useful as opposed to focusing on the competitiveness side?
Well, the problem is that who, as Noela said, who will set the agenda? What is going to be studied? And what I try to put in my presentation is that you do not have to rely on good ideas or good proposals. The problem is who is going to push forward a new agenda. That's the problem. And because we are thinking as if the state will take, or the market will take the good things, and they are good, neutrally speaking. No, things are good for some people, for some groups, and are bad for others. So if we have a specific agenda, we have to know, and inside the discussion of the innovation policy, the question of who are the social forces that will push forward the innovation policy is a big question and a very important question. This means that we are dealing not with individuals, but we are dealing with groups that have a history in this country, that have a tradition, and that can, in some way, push an agenda. The same way as the business sector every day is pushing their agenda, lobbying in the governments, because they have a tradition, they have a union, they have common interests. Who are the other social forces that are in the same ground? Who are? Is the public in general that can lobby the government? Are the individuals that we are dialoguing with in the forums that will go and push a new agenda? No. The only ones that can push a different and alternative agenda are the ones that are previously organized, that have an historical political experience on how to deal in political issues. And this is not scientists, neither public. These are huge NGOs, these are trade unions. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank the speakers for their presentations, which I think in many ways the innovation angle really feeds in nicely to the closeout that talks about next steps, right? So I want to thank all of you for listening patiently. You're supposed to stay glued to your seats. No escaping. Richard and his team come up here and further enlighten you, because he doesn't want it to end here, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jennifer. So we do have a little bit more, well, we're scheduled to end at 1 o'clock. We probably may not need that much time. But we do want to close this out, the conference, after these, another excellent panel, I would say, with a little bit of reflection and looking forward a little bit, but also bringing it closer to home, to what the exchanges that have happened here during the conference would mean for some of you, you in person, as you go back to your work and think about how you might carry some of the experience that you've had forward. And what I'd like to do is just hear some of your voices in some other settings with a little bit more time. We've sometimes just heard from everybody around the room, but I'm not sure if we'll be able to make that. But I'd love to hear from some of the different perspectives that are here in the room, what they are taking away from this. So, you know, some of the people working in physical sciences, what does this exchange with social scientists and entrepreneurs and people working in development, what does that mean for you as you go forward, go back to your work? The social scientists who are learning a little bit more, maybe not so familiar with nanotechnology and what it might bring. What are you taking away from this? And there are some people who have been working at these intersections of the social and physical sciences for quite a while, and have been part of these kinds of conversations that are also here in the room. And I'd love to hear from them, or from at least one of them, what are you taking away from this? And again, so think about that for a little bit. And I'd like to kick that off actually by asking Rachel, who you've all gotten to know as the main person doing a lot of the legwork organizing this conference, but who also pushed for this conference because she cares about these issues. So I'd like to hear from her.
Is that okay?
But, yeah, you can go up there. That's totally cool.
I don't actually have a PowerPoint, but let's see. So I'd like to actually first thank you all for coming. As Rex just hinted, this meeting has obviously been a long time in the making, beginning actually with a conversation at a Gordon Research Conference, not this past summer, actually the one before, in which I was introduced to a group of people who all had ideas that they wanted to take out of their labs and out of their homes because they believed that what they were doing could have a positive impact somewhere else. Take, for example, Vicky Colvin's talk and the DIY approach to arsenic removal. Was there something that was scalable? Was there something that was replicable? Over the course of the past year and a half, I've thought about these questions. And I've gotten the chance to meet each one of you, whether you knew I was doing so or not. And then was working closely with my collaborators at UCSB and at Meridian to make sure what I already knew to be the case, that this wonderful, eclectic group of people would work well together, that the pieces would just somehow fit together, that new collaborations would form between people who under ordinary circumstances would not have the opportunity to meet. Over the past 2.5 days, I've had the opportunity to listen in on some wonderful conversations. On a personal level, I have a long-standing interest, research interest in water and bringing clean, safe water to those who do not have access. In the water group, we had many discussions. We'd been trying to figure out how nanotechnology might do this. What is transformative about nano? What's revolutionary? Is it revolutionary? Will nanotechnology enable equitable development and the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals? While we might not have gotten quite that far, and realistically, and at the risk of sounding like a technology skeptic, probably not. But what stands out in my mind as a technology optimist is something that Raphael brought up this morning about nanotechnology's likely incremental impact. Take, for example, Jimmy Yu's project producing saltwater purifiers that are commercialized and in use in Hong Kong restaurants. Related to the idea of incremental change in the context of opportunities for equitable development, I'd like to also borrow from Jose Gomez Marquez and his idea that central to the success or failure of some of these projects is the idea that projects should be high impact but affordable. I'd like to conclude with the idea that the lessons from history are also important, as Summer mentioned in the morning, and that we should, of course, be aware of being overly prescriptive and technological determinism, but also that we are all here for a reason, because we all have a feeling of social responsibility. We want to help work towards solutions to these pressing problems, and through these relationships that we've now begun to build and the face-to-face introductions that we've learned from Caroline's presentation are so important for the success of future collaboration. We have already begun to lay the groundwork for future grassroots local action. It was my goal to bring you all together because I do believe in the importance of starting somewhere. And I believe it was Usha in the health group yesterday who said, it doesn't matter where you start, as long as you take the time to think about all the angles. Thank you.
So I asked all of you before we had our break to think about, what do you take away from this? What does this mean for your work as you go back? So I'd like to just ask for some people who would like to share their thoughts on that. And again, I'd love to hear from some different perspectives.
That's why my hand didn't go up.
Sorry, I was looking. I guess in perspective.
I'll wait.
All right, no, that's okay. Actually, I have talked to some people to get ready and think about this. Here, Usha, why don't we start with you?
Thank you to Rachel, Rich, and all the organizers, and to Barbara. This has been just terrific. I'm going back home with so much in my head. I'm overloaded. But this is good because most of these kinds of conferences take about, I would say, 6 to 12 months to digest because you've really visited with very different types of people. I do have certain agenda things that I'm going to follow up on. But just in terms of throwing out some big level issues, I really take Raphael Kaplinski's point seriously in that perhaps do we want to start defining what we mean by the North and the South in terms of innovation. One of my colleagues ginned up the term innovative developing countries to refer to Brazil, India, and China. So maybe, the definitional viewpoints that we're taking
passé for what we need to deal with in terms of nanoscience. And one thing I wanted to discover with this group of sociologists and anthropologists is I'm a diaspora, Indian American. Have we done studies on diaspora scientists, diaspora philanthropists, who could be the bridge builders that we all would benefit from? I'm just going to leave you with that thought. If there are actual action items that come up, I do have several collaborations I'm hoping to launch because of this conference. Thank you.
Who else?
I join Usha in thanking the organizers, Rachel, Richard, and Barbara. It was great. I've been attending a lot of these conferences on nano, since about 2006. So it's just my reaction that whenever we come for the first day, it's really exciting. There'll be one lecture like that of microco. It really excites you as a scientist. There's lots of things to do. And then as we start peeling that onion, you keep peeling it, you don't reach anything. That was what was yesterday. There were so many issues coming up, and I thought I was quite confused. I thought I knew a lot about nano, but I was quite confused at the end of the day. But then there is something like a cutting edge, something cuts. The cutting edge was those breakaway sessions. They were really good because this is the first time in so many years I've seen so many social scientists trying to, we scientists talking with social science. I've just seen it in theory, heard in practice, never seen in practice. Everybody saying you must reach out to social scientists, and we do a lot that in agriculture. We have a lot of these sessions with grassroots innovators, but frankly, I haven't seen the methodology which was followed, and I must really compliment Rex and his team. It's really good. And the last session was the session. It really enlightened a lot. I take back that it's just not science. I need to move more than science. I've learned a lot from this conference. Back at home, we do a lot of these sessions like this, conferences. I belong to an academy where we actually facilitate a lot of. So I think I've learned a lot from from Rex group also. So I'm taking all these tools and the knowledge. Let's see if this network can expand further. Thank you.
Noella?
Okay. Just a quick comment. First, it was very nice to be here and to participate in all these discussions. So I very much appreciated to be here. But one thing I was commenting a while ago with the girls was that the thing that was most important for me was hearing what different people think about, because I am very used to academic meetings and the way the social science thinks, and sometimes it is very difficult even to reach an agreement or to talk with a hard science, and much different. We have much difficulties in understand what is in the mind of people that are doing some practical things and some practical work. So it was very, very nice to hear about different persons that are engaging with nanotechnology and other technologies from very different backgrounds. So this was very good for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rex. Well, this is a nano conference with mega information. I really enjoy it. Yeah, and it gives me new perspectives to look at issues. And I'm going to be in contact with all of you, and particularly those from social science, because it's really, really eye-opening. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I feel that this was a really worthwhile conference to attend and very unusual. Here we are in the heart of America, and there's a conference looking at how to help developing countries, the poor, and so on. There's a mixture here of scientists and sociologists, and the viewpoints coming through. I found all of this very, very encouraging and very, very unusual. I have not been at a forum like this before. I think that this ought to be encouraged, that the forum like this be much more attended by larger audiences, so they see that, you know, many people think Americans don't think about anybody else. They are leading and so on. And it's so encouraging that Americans themselves are saying, how shall we do this? How can social scientists have an impact on issues on development? And so on and so on. I really found this very encouraging, and I hope that this is not the ending to it, but maybe sometimes a meeting like this held in Africa, it would have a real big meaning to Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I really have learned a lot, and I've also learned how little I know. From a very personal point of view, I've always considered that it's humbling what we're trying to do, you know, to help people help themselves. And you think, okay, I'm about to take the next big step, because I'm going to stop being a prof in a couple of months, and you know, I'm going into the kind of social entrepreneurship or social business, as Muhammad Yunus would say. But what I'm actually taking home from this conference, and I actually just wrote it in my notes here, is that I actually thought I knew pretty well what the people, the citizens that we're trying to serve, what they needed. And I've just realized that maybe I should just step back a wee bit. And to quote my late father-in-law, he used to always say, like, why spoil a ship for a halfpenny worth of tar? Or maybe the North American, a more common expression is, there's never time to do it right, but there's always time to do it twice, you know? So maybe I should stop thinking about how old I'm getting and how little time I've got left to try and do what we're trying to do, and say it's maybe worth 3 months or 6 months trying to involve social scientists or anthropologists, etc., just to make sure that we really do have our lighting system, you know, right, and or at least largely right. That where we think it is now, but I think maybe getting other people involved in asking us questions that we haven't even dreamt of asking ourselves can really be a lasting benefit. Anyway, thank you very much for raising a lot of questions, and I have no idea what the answers are.
Thanks, Dave. Hello?
Yes. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It was so good. I stay here and learn more nanotechnology, about another aspects of nanotechnology. And I think our people can continue to discuss this and can contribute with the public engagement in nanotechnology, give the information about this for general public. I think this will increase our knowledge in general in our place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe one more comment for somebody? Okay, who else? Sorry, I'm Jeff and Guillermo, and anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak much during the plenary that'd like to talk? Jesse as well. All right, Guillermo, Jeff, and Jesse, and then we'll turn it over to Rich.
Okay, besides thanking, of course, the possibility of being here myself, I understand my role now is to diffuse within the Latin American Nanotechnology and Society Network and in other countries what was being discussed here. There was a lot of people in those countries very interested in these issues, and I think if in next opportunities we can do something like this in our countries, will be very interesting. I hope we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, all right, we'll add Tambela in the lineup as well.
Okay, thanks very much. And like everyone else, thanks for being here. It's been an interesting experience. What will I take away? I'm not entirely sure. A mixture of confusion, frustration, excitement. Yeah, lots of things. And there's still a lot of huge things that people need to understand and cross the borders between the kind of techno-optimism and the kind of social realism that might need to go in with some of it. Immediately what I'll do, probably next week, is I'll be in Rome at the People's Forum on Food Sovereignty as an observer, and at the UN Food Summit, and also at a big Garnet conference by the EU on governance in the food system. And I'll probably mention something about nanotech in all of it, and I hope it will lead to some of them to challenge you, question, and engage. What will come of it, I don't know.
Good. Thank you. Jesse, and then Tambela, and then go over to you, Rich.
Thank you. So I work with lab gloves on most of the time, and so it's new for me to get out and be exposed to a lot of different perspectives. I usually don't have time to even read the current news, so I'm really thankful for just hearing from the anthropology, social science perspective, and really think about what has been different technologies that have been developed in the past and how we can learn a lot from history. So asking those questions of history has really helped me think of my current work, especially as I go down to Mexico next month to use a nanomaterial-based solution to clean drinking water as a pilot study. So no one will be drinking it yet, but it's probably the right time, I realize now, to be working with the people that are contacts there instead of working kind of for them to develop something. And so those key thoughts are very applicable to me just as I go. And so I hope to be able to document, to blog just my experiences on that after I come back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Tambela?
Okay, thank you. Again, I think when we were discussing yesterday about the momentum, we've had these kinds of meetings, and it was great, but I think we do represent some of the ideas and from where we're coming from in some cases. But I'm more interested in what to do going on, and I could even suggest in terms of maintaining that. I liked the talk about this invisible college, because we always say usually knowledge, especially science, should not have a regional identity. Now, in that regard, I would I would say for these young scientists, the students who've been presenting and all that, going back, I can accommodate, or we should, when we go back, try to say, you guys should see what is actually happening in these developing countries at face value. I'll be willing to host if some would want to see in close proximity, such that these ideas and what you've seen and heard from us, you can be able to experience it on the ground level.
Great. Thank you very much. Rich? Yeah. Song and dance.
Well, to use a non-scientific, non-technical term from my own culture, it would be extreme chutzpah to try to pull this all together and summarize. In Yiddish, that means arrogance. The comments that you've all made, the last panel, and Rachel's comments really pulled this together quite a beautiful way, for me anyhow. So let me just take a few minutes. I want to thank folks. I want to offer my own personal reflections on this very briefly. And then I do want to address next steps as I see them. Okay, well, thanks. Again, I thank the Wilson Center. I thank Rachel especially. Here's a Rachel story for you. Going into the first day of the conference, Rachel was a nervous wreck. I think that's an understatement. After our little dinner party and maybe a little wine that evening, I asked Rachel how she was doing. She said, "I just want this to go on forever." We really owe it to Rachel. And we owe it big to Meridian Institute. I said at the beginning that I had a lot of anxiety about this format because I'm more used to this panels, PowerPoints, 15 minutes of Q&A where people make their points. I thought that this worked incredibly well, and I gather that most of you agree with that, or all of you agree with that. It was informative for me, especially in the breakout groups, to hear the give and take and the discussion across the social science, I don't want to say hard science, physical science divide. I want to thank the graduate students who really put certainly me to shame. You may or may not appreciate this, but they spent hours after the meetings putting these PowerPoints together, putting their notes together. They've taken copious notes on this, which we'll make available to you once they've been redacted or modified or cleaned up a little bit. But they really put a Herculean amount of work in, and I'd like to give them a round of applause. The presentations were also uniformly spectacular, I thought. And I want to thank all of you. This has been a great, great experience for me personally. Okay, so reflections, just very quickly. I have 1,000 reflections, but I'll just give you 5 of them. One, bridging divides. I think probably 75 years ago, a philosopher and writer, C.P. Snow, wrote about the two cultures, science and the social science humanities, and the difficulty of bridging them. And I felt that we bridged them to a large extent. And that, to me, is just an incredible takeaway. There are other divides, too. There's the public-private divide. There's the emerging civil society divide. All of these were touched on at various points in this conference in what, for me, was just an enormously constructive way. I can't say we bridged these divides forever, but I think we've made a step in a good direction here. My second observation, I would say, the devil's in the details. We've had a lot of general conversations about what we should do in these 4 areas, but it clearly matters enormously the arena in which we're working. Are we working in China with a huge national system which is mobilized to elevate hundreds of millions of people out of poverty? Are we trying to light up the world, one house at a time? It makes a big difference, I think. And so my conclusion there is you can't really generalize. And I have to say, on a personal note, I'm a lumper, not a splitter. I like to bring things together, see many solutions, so I don't make hard choices. I think there's a place for everything. Another reflection has to do with the role of the public, something we heard about on the last panel. What is the public? What is this public? Your comments, Guillermo. The public is groups. It's unions, it's individuals, civil society organizations, businesses. If you went up to the Hill yesterday, as I did, you saw a public. You saw tens of thousands of angry demonstrators screaming against health care reform in this country. I think we have to be cognizant also of the social structures that are behind this. And just another comment on this. An underlying theme of this conference has been the importance of participation. Actually, it was a Danish immigrant to the United States, Miles Horton, who at the turn of the 20th century founded the Highlander Folk School in rural Tennessee and created a whole field which, at least in my world, is called participatory action research. He was famous for having a place in rural Appalachia that had rocking chairs in a circle. And people would come in, people who are uneducated, the poorest of the poor, to complain about toxic dumping in their streams. And he would combine, I guess, social scientists, technical scientists, and people from the community, and they would come up with solutions to this, which would not only involve the people from the area at the front end, but also to empower them. By that he meant give them the skills that they would need to carry this forth when the experts had long disappeared. And there are some amazing victories there. And just a story many of you may not know, the civil rights movement in the United States was launched in large part from his operation. Rosa Parks, who famously in Montgomery refused to go to the back of the bus, did not simply say, my feet are tired, I won't do it. She was a trained person from a social movement which was launched in that area. So I think that's a key thing also. Another brief reflection is, are we focusing on nanotechnology as we go forward? Any advanced technology? Can we redefine emerging technology to mean a technology that is emerging for the first time in a particular community? Here again, I'm a lumper, not a splitter, even though my funding comes from the National Science Foundation around nanotechnology. And finally, the issues that were addressed so brilliantly, I thought, in the presentations in the last panel, having to do with issues of equity, equality, and so forth. I think that just has to be an absolute central part of what we do. So let me now just lay out some next steps for you. And these are just thoughts that I have. You'll be hearing from us on this. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is go on a long bike ride tomorrow. Relax, reflect, whatever. Okay, so the question is, how do we keep up the momentum, which built here over 2.5 days? A fairly low-cost and short-term thing is to set up a kind of web-based connection, a blog. One of the things that I'm grappling with, and I'd appreciate feedback from you, not now necessarily, but in email, should we set up 4 different ways of social networking according to the 4 different areas? They're all obviously interrelated in various ways. Should there be one? How can we best do that? I'm not a huge Facebook user. I seem to be on Twitter since people keep telling me they're following me. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know what they're following. But all of those things we intend to do fairly quickly. And it's not clear who will host this. Facebook obviously is a public hosting. Whether our Nanotech Center could possibly host a blog on this, Barbara and I need to talk about that. But we will definitely find a way for you to continue the networking and conversations also. And one question on that is, who do we pull into that then, apart from the people at this conference, and how do we manage that? There are some excellent models. Sloan Industry Studies has some excellent discussions online, so we'll pursue that. I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but we hope to get a book out of this. I have been remiss, as Rachel will remind me repeatedly, and not yet lining up a publisher, but I will pursue that. We invite not only the present, and you'll be hearing from us on this also, not only the formal presentations, but all the participants who would like to contribute something. And we'll probably organize it along the various panels of this. And back to the blog, we'll also make available, I believe, the PowerPoints in PDF format, as well as any other resources you care to send us to post to it. So, okay, so a book. A new organization. Should we become a slightly more visible college? I'm not sure, Caroline, maybe you can advise us on this. Mike Rocco, who rode with the taxi and the taxi with me over to the event on the Hill, was just full of great ideas. Not a lot of money, but full of great ideas. And I'll tell you what he proposed, some type of consultative organization at the international level with representatives from different regions. It could be called the Council. He wanted the word council because that was high level in his view, on emerging technologies for equitable development. I know that Mike wants to promote the Nano thing, and I think that's great. I'm not sure what organizational form this should take, if any, and I'm way too old to run an international nano organization, but I'd appreciate your feedback on that also. But some way to keep this going forward and to expand the discussion to others who could otherwise be here, your own networks, to create a network of networks. One question is who should host this? Strong suggestion for some UN agency, such as the UNDP or UNIDO or something like that. So I'll be exploring all of this. So just to conclude, Senator Ron Wyden would launch the event on the Hill. He is a senator from Oregon who is head of the Congressional Nanotechnology Caucus, and he said something interesting. I'm not going to quote him directly here, but he concluded his remarks by saying that nanotechnology was, quote, a technical treasure trove, in his view, that needed to get out of the labs and into the community. That's the spirit of this conference. We hope to make that happen. We have let, I think, 1,000 flowers bloom. Our challenge is to plant a couple of them anyhow and get them to grow and flourish. Thank you immensely for this conference. And one announcement I forgot to make. Apollo is hosting a conference, if you're interested, in Rio de Janeiro, actually a year from today, November 10th through 12th, 2010, the 7th International Nanotechnology Society and Environment Seminar, so talk to him if you're interested. Again, thank you all for coming.